Okay, so we're a couple minutes past 2 p.m. here, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. First, I hope you can hear me all okay. I was just telling Hannah before the session began that it's been warm and sunny here, but literally within moments, a storm just rolled in. I can hear it outside my window. So if my connection is spotty at any point, please let me know. I'm happy to repeat myself. Unfortunately, technical issues, audio issues, and connectivity issues are part of the package when it comes with virtual engagement. So just give me a heads up if you have any trouble hearing me. And then a couple of reminders before we begin. For the most part, I would like participants to stay muted when they're not speaking during this session. When you join the session, you're automatically muted. So I'd ask that you keep your microphone on mute until you want to add something or you have a question, just for the sake of audio and interruptions. In addition to unmuting yourself and just verbally asking questions, you're also welcome to use the chat function, which is on the bar that is either on the top or the bottom of your screen. You can send chat messages to the group as a whole or to me privately and directly if you have questions, comments, observations that you would like to add. Feel free to utilize that. It's a great way to engage without talking over each other too much, but this session in particular will definitely be very interactive by nature. It needs to be, since we will be focusing on interviewing methods and techniques and trying to exercise this particular method. So I've worked in several examples and some activities in today's session, which will require your active participation. So I want to thank everyone in advance for actively participating in today's workshop. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Maria, and I'm a recruiter with a company called Hajoca Corporation. We are the nation's largest privately held wholesale distributor of plumbing, heating, and industrial supplies, a very blue-collar business by nature, but fortunately it is an essential business, which, especially in times like this, is really highly appealing. We are essential to public health, so we are continuing to operate with some business adjustments during this time. In terms of my role, I spend quite a bit of time at Virginia Tech recruiting for our management development program, which is an entry-level leadership training program that helps train high potential entry-level candidates and prepare them for management positions in one of our 400 locations across the country. It's a great opportunity. For today, we will be focusing on interviewing. If you attended a session that we held, I think it was early last week, we talked a bit about phone interviewing. Today, we're going to be taking a deeper dive specifically into behavioral interviewing and the STAR method. All right. I want to make sure everyone can see my screen okay. All right, so we're going to exercise some participation right off the bat. How many of you have had job interviews before? If you want to chime in via chat, that would be great. Awesome. It looks like almost all the participants have had an interviewing experience. Today's content really is tailored for all experience levels. So if you've never had an interview before, you're not familiar with this approach or behavioral interviewing at all, this workshop would be for beginners to more experienced levels. So if you have more questions, given that you have interviewing experience, please jump in. We want to make sure this conversation pertains to you, what you need, what you're focusing on developing. How many of you have been asked behavioral interview questions before? Okay, again, several people. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So this will apply directly to you. You probably know that behavioral interviewing is one of the most common interview techniques that is used today, but it's also pretty challenging. So that's why we're going to spend some time honing our skills when it comes to behavioral interviewing. So first, what is a behavioral interview? A behavioral interview will place you back into specific scenarios so the interviewer can assess how you navigated various situations. Pretty simple, right? It requires you to reflect on your past real-world experiences. Why is it used? The biggest predictor of likely future performance are our previous actions and behaviors. So typically an interviewer or a hiring manager will ask behavioral interviewing questions to help gauge certain skills and how you address certain situations to evaluate how you might handle those situations again in the future. They're usually probing for soft skills, hard skills that are specific to the job that you're pursuing. So we'll talk more about that specifically. Interviews, like I mentioned, they're usually looking at two different things, soft skills and hard skills. Soft skills are, of course, the habits or traits that shape how you work and interact with others. They're typically learned over a long period of time. So mostly ingrained in your personality, your characteristics. And some examples of soft skills would include work ethic, adaptability, integrity, teamwork, things that are a little less tangible by nature, right? Whereas hard skills are job specific, gained through practice or training, and they're usually pretty teachable and measurable by nature. So some examples of hard skills would include proficiency in a certain technology, bilingual, so knowledge and practice of more than one language, or writing. Could be technical writing, creative writing. Those are things that you usually work on and develop through formal education or training of some kind. In some circumstances, they even go with a level of certification, right? So they're so quantifiable that you can actually kind of put a stamp on it. I've received X amount of training in this level of proficiency with this particular skill, right? They're much more measurable than soft skills, which are a little bit more difficult to identify and measure, which is why behavioral interviewing is all the more popular, because it is usually focused on identifying those soft skills. It's one of the primary methods for helping to uncover those skills that are less tangible and less apparent. The behavioral interview questions typically require a specific example, not a theoretical or a hypothetical response. So for that reason, they usually begin with a phrase like, tell me about a time when, or give me an example of, versus what would you do if, which is kind of asking about something in theory, whereas tell me about a time when and give me an example of, again, is looking for specific scenarios from your past that you've lived through. Questions about behavioral interviewing before we move on. Again, the method that we are workshopping today is an approach used in response to behavioral interview questions. So I just want everyone to understand exactly what a behavioral interview question looks like, what it's asking for, the purpose for behavioral interviews, forgive me, before we move on. Okay. So what is the STAR method? The STAR method is a structured method for answering behavioral interview questions. These questions usually require a specific example, as mentioned, and the STAR method will help you form a complete and cohesive response to these questions. How? It uses the structure of situation, task, action, and result. So the STAR method by title actually outlines what the structure of your response should look like. The situation is, of course, setting the scene, the who, the what, the when, the where, the why of it all. It provides the interviewer with some context and demonstrates that it is a specific example from your past experiences, not a generalization or a fabrication, which would not be good. You don't want to be making up experiences in an interview, right? And one tip I like to share is that when it comes to the when, you want to try to provide a fairly recent example, approximately within the last 4 years, give or take, but not so recent that there's not yet an outcome. Some of the first examples that might come to mind are things that you're currently living through. The issue is that there isn't yet a full story to tell. There's usually the situation, the task, even maybe the action to identify, but there's not yet the results. So you can't round out your response. So aim for recent, but not so recent that it's happening here and now. Questions about what the situation is. Pretty simple stuff, right? Again, setting the scene, providing some context so the interviewer understands the remainder of your response. Task is the goal that you're working towards. It's usually fairly short and sweet by nature. To illustrate just how short and sweet, I provided some examples. So let's say the question is, tell me about a time you had handled a difficult customer interaction. The situation you want to talk about could be a customer wanted to use a coupon that was expired. You know, maybe you work in a grocery store. This is a common situation that happens in grocery stores. The task in a situation like this would likely be something along the lines of upholding the company policy while ensuring customer satisfaction. Pretty simple, right? Or say you have a situation you want to share in which a customer was upset because their order came out wrong. Again, another really common scenario if you were to work in food service or restaurant. The task in a situation like this would likely be to ensure they leave happy and satisfied. So again, to the point, short and sweet, it doesn't take up a whole lot of your response, but it obviously needs to be identified in your answer. Questions about the task? Pretty simple. Okay, action. Actions are the steps you took to address the situation and accomplish the task at hand. The action part of your response is really the meat of your response. This is where you want to spend the most time in your answer. Largely because this is where you're demonstrating the skill that the interviewer is looking for, right? And when talking about the action or the actions that you took, you want to be sure to emphasize your specific actions and contributions, even if you were working among a team. Again, this interview is not about the team, it's about you. So make sure to specifically identify your contributions and the steps that you specifically took. Keeping in mind, the interviewer is evaluating how you navigated the situation and that your approach reflects how you may handle similar situations in the future. That's why you want to spend the most amount of time talking about the action and your approach. We will go through some examples in which we'll identify exactly where they discussed their actions. Any questions about this? Again, pretty simple by definition, right? Finally, the result, which is, of course, the outcome of the situation. I will tell you that candidates very often forget to highlight the result. When I'm doing mock interviews and in real interviews, I find that candidates tell a really detailed, thorough response, but sometimes forget to round that out without actually providing me with the result of their actions. It is a really important component of your answer, so you don't want to forget it. However, the result is not always positive, nor does it need to be, as long as you can turn it into a learning experience. This is really important, and I will show you exactly how you could do this through some examples. I think is the best way to describe how you can frame things as a learning experience. But just keep that in mind as we move through the rest of this workshop, and as you think and reflect on some of your experiences. You wish there was always a positive outcome, but life is life. Not everything turns out the way that we hope it would. And there's often a lot of good examples in your past that didn't yield a positive outcome, but did show a clear demonstration of certain skills and abilities. So keep that in mind. In turning not positive outcomes into learning experience, you are showing the interviewer that you're self-aware, resilient, and capable of handling future mistakes, failures, because you've lived through it before. And I said here that our learning experiences are arguably just as valuable as our wins, because those are the things that push us, help us grow, challenge us, and force us to learn. Questions about the result or this, my point about making it a learning experience? Okay, so now we're going to move into an exercise because we've talked about these concepts in theory and definition, which is easy to do, but actually implementing this method and identifying these different components can be a bit more challenging than just, breaking down the structure of the STAR method, right? So for this particular exercise, I'm going to use an interview question I often use when interviewing for entry-level roles. It's a pretty simple question, but it yields a variety of responses, some of which we'll work through today. The question is, tell me about a time you handled a negative issue with a member of a team you were working with. As you can imagine, I'm really looking at communication and teamwork, the ability to solve problems, just to name a few of the soft skills I'm identifying with a question like this. In this particular question, the interviewer is looking for, was it school, work, extracurriculars? Was it a classmate, coworker, peer, or teammate? What would this information be considered? Situation, task, action, or result? This is where I'll need some of your participation. Feel free to use the chat box or speak up if you're comfortable with that. See some responses. Situation. Yep, exactly right. School, work, extracurriculars. That's the where. Classmate, coworker, peer, teammate, that's the who, right? Next, this question is also looking for what was the issue? Which component would that be? S, T, A, or R? Situation, task, action, or result? This one's there we go. Yeah, this one's a little more difficult. It may cause some pause, right? It is, yes, the task. It also is a bit of the situation because you're setting the scene, but usually identifying the issue will also tell you what the goal is as well. So it's a little bit of both. How did you handle it? Would that be considered the situation, the task, the action, or the result? Action. Action, action, right? How did you handle it is almost directly looking for what their approach is. Lastly, what was the outcome? Would that be the situation, task, action, or result? well, it's easy. I made it a little easy here. I did put it in order of S, T, A, and R, but that's some of the information the interviewer is looking for as it directly pertains to the STAR structure. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you. So we're going to work through some examples here. Now, keep in mind, I'm going to flip back to avoid reading ahead. Keep in mind, these examples are similar to situations I've heard about previously, but I am not pulling direct examples from candidates' responses. You'll see as I work through them, the really common scenarios. So I think they're good situations to break down to see exactly how the STAR method is applied in action. Okay, example response 1. I had a group project for my project management course last semester that accounted for a large portion of our grade. I was in a group of 5 people, one of which started the semester strong, but gradually stopped showing up to meetings and contributing to the project. The rest of the group was growing increasingly frustrated since they had to cover that team member's work in order to meet class requirements. After a few weeks, it was clear we needed this teammate's full effort, and I decided to approach the issue with them. After class one day, I pulled them aside to talk. We talked about the weekend before I addressed our group project. I tried to be as gentle as possible. Hey, I noticed you've missed a couple meetings lately. How is everything going? Are you doing okay? It turned out that some things happened in their personal life and it was affecting their schoolwork. They recognized they had dropped the ball and were very apologetic. I firmly communicated that we need their participation and asked if there was anything I could do to help. We agreed to discuss a new plan with our group at the next meeting. Example response 1 continued. At that meeting, the team member apologized to the group, after which we redistributed the work and adjusted our meetings to accommodate everyone. Moving forward, we saw a huge improvement in the teammate and we ended up doing really well on the project. I think addressing the situation was the right decision, and getting everyone on the same page was really important to getting the job done. Ooh. Long response, right? It's usually not said quite as quickly as that, but it is a very common example I receive. So let's break it down. In this example, what is the situation? I'll flip back to help. Non-participating member of the group. That's right. Anything else? So yeah, the group member not participating absolutely is a big and important part of the situation. But to take it a step further, this candidate provided me with plenty of detail. I knew the who, 5 people in their group, 1 member not contributing, right? The what, group project for a project management course. The when was last semester, pretty recent, right? The where, again, project management course, I'm assuming at this school. And the why, you know, what their focus was and why this was an issue, right? What was the task in this situation? Meeting class requirements. Making sure everyone is properly contributing. Awesome answer. Because the task is so short and sweet, it's not quite as easily or specifically identified in a response. Sometimes it's just like 1 or 2 words in there that really identify what the task is, right? But it says it here in a few words. After a few weeks, it was clear we needed this teammate's full effort. So the task is, they need their contribution. How do we get their contribution? Awesome answer. What was their action? What was the approach they took? I'll flip to make it a little easier. Awesome. One person said, one person talking privately rather than being confronted by everyone. So yes, their approach in this situation was very well thought out and intentional. They pulled them aside after class and they talked to them about the issue, easing into the issue. I see someone just added, right? This candidate gave me a lot of detail about their approach, which is good because it is a clear demonstration of certain skills like communication, the ability to have difficult conversations, teamwork, things like that. So they demonstrated a lot of great skills, primarily communication in this situation, and they did a good job showcasing them because they didn't leave out a whole lot of detail. They told me exactly how they opened up the conversation and even some of the words that they used. So this candidate really gave me all the information I need for a clear demonstration of their communication skills, right? And finally, what was the result here? The result here was definitely a positive one. Someone just said everyone was able to participate. Fantastic, right? Not only that, they did really well on their project. And it was probably because they got the full effort from everyone on their team as a result of this particular candidate's approach to the situation. So again, highlighting that result is really important because their approach to the situation, this negative situation, was effective. So an effective use of certain skills that yielded a good outcome, right? Happy endings here. So this is an example I wanted to start with because it is positive and because it is so detailed. The candidate effectively utilized the STAR method and their action led to a successful result. So all around a really detailed response to work with, to lead our exercise today, and a happy ending. That's not always the case. It's not always a super detailed response, and there's not always a happy outcome like we talked about earlier. So let's look at another one. Example response 2. Every semester for my business club, we host a networking event open to all students in an effort to recruit new members to the organization. I was responsible for coordinating the event along with one other person. We had different ideas about how to structure the event. My teammate thought that it should be a very casual, laid-back evening to make non-members feel welcomed and at ease. I felt this didn't align with the nature of our organization, as we are very focused on professionalism. We discussed it in a meeting and ultimately decided to go with their idea. It turned out great. The students had fun and were engaged. As a result, we recruited 20% of the attendees. even though we didn't stick with my idea, I was really happy with the outcome. So this is a little bit of a different scenario. Again, one I hear about quite a bit, student organization involvement. Let's break down this response using the STAR method. What was the situation here? I'll go back, I think it helps to have the answer in front of you. Team was hosting a network event, right? To summarize, that's exactly it. Team was hosting a networking event. This candidate did provide, a lot of detail, a lot of context. Again, it happens every semester. It sounds like this was a fairly recent example. They explained why they were hosting the event. Yep, exactly. Event organization. They explained who they were working with. I was responsible for coordinating with one other person. So they gave me some good context. They definitely set a little bit of a scene, so I understood what event they were talking about, and why there was this difference in opinion around ideas, right? What was the task in this situation? And it comes right on the tail of what you identified as the situation. Perfect. Addressing differing ideas, right? The situation was they were organizing this event, and then they were tasked with coming to an agreement, right? They had both good ideas around the format, but they had to come to a consensus, right? What was the action here? Do we know? Choosing the right approach. Somewhat. I don't expect a whole lot of chatter when it comes to talking about the action in this situation, because the candidate didn't really go into a lot of detail, right? We discussed this in a meeting. Okay, then what? What were the steps? Where's the meat? Yes, thank you. This is where they want to be spending the most time talking about the demonstration of a certain skill, and going into the most detail in their response. So yes, thank you for remembering that. They're missing so much of the meat of their response, right? Finally, we'll talk more about that. But before we do, finally, what is the result? Yep. Yep. Again, another happy ending. With this particular situation, we had a very quantifiable results. They actually gave me a number around the results. We recruited 20% of the attendees. So talk about detail. I'm like, oh, that speaks for itself, right? Yielding 20% recruits is fantastic. I don't know what it normally looks like, but that would be an impactful and successful event, right? But like we identified, they didn't discuss the action in much detail, right? We're left kind of wondering what steps they took to get to that successful result. We're missing a lot of the details of the discussion they had with their teammate, and this could be really valuable to the interviewer, particularly because they ultimately went with the other person's idea. It kind of leaves you wondering, was it a compromise? Did they change their mind? Were they demonstrating the willingness to try something new and take a risk? Or did they concede to be a people pleaser, right? How did they address the conflict of different ideas? we're missing that whole demonstration of the skills. I'm so glad they had a successful event. That's great. That's not what I'm here to learn. I'm here to learn about you, right? So we're missing some of that. And the candidate, as a result, could be doing themselves a bit of a disservice, especially if in that meeting they showed great collaboration, communication skills. Maybe they ultimately kind of led to that decision. Who knows? Or it could show the otherwise, like maybe they just kind of rolled over and said, okay, we can do whatever makes you happy. You just don't know. As an interviewer, I want to know one way or another. So personally, I ask, I probe, and I say, tell me more about the discussion. Why did you ultimately go with their idea? How did that make you feel, right? Were they frustrated or angry about this? Are they not able to kind of go with other people's ideas and cooperate and collaborate? What did you learn from this experience is another question I often ask, right? However, not a lot of interviewers will ask these follow-up questions. And if you're interviewing with an interviewer that doesn't probe, you will lose the opportunity to fully showcase your abilities in this situation, potentially your ability to collaborate, cooperate, work with the team. Someone has to go back to the situation slide. Happy to do that. Did you have a specific question about the response? Yep, you said the person mentions that they go with someone else's idea a couple times. So it seems like they may not truly be okay with it. Interesting observation. That could totally be true. As an interviewer, a best practice as an interviewer is to not assume too much, right? I think you're drawing some interesting and smart inferences about this situation. However, as an interviewer, I am constantly working against making assumptions of any kind. So I can't quite fill in the gaps here. I really only have to go based off of what they share with me, which is why I really need that meat. I really need the action step in order to gauge their abilities with a certain skill. Otherwise, I'm just left not knowing much about a certain skill, right? So I think you're drawing some interesting observations, and there's a good chance you're right here, but we just won't know until they provide more information. So as from the candidate's perspective, you want to provide that information, particularly if it's good information that showcases you and your skills. It can be challenging to remember all of these details, right? Interviewing is nerve-wracking enough to sit there and to try to flip through, like, did I give the S, the T? Did I go into enough detail with the action? What was my result? It can be challenging to remember it all. So as a safety net, I often encourage candidates to incorporate the phrase, did I answer your question fully? This is something, if you were in our phone interviewing session last week, it was a habit or a tip that I encourage candidates to adopt. Again, it just kind of covers your bases. You don't need to necessarily ask this question after providing every single response by any means. But if you're sitting there wondering, did I answer that question right? This is a way to find out. You can ask that question, and it creates the opportunity for you to cover anything you may have missed and further showcase your skills. It shows the interviewer you care. It creates the opportunity for them to identify important aspects you may have missed in your response, particularly a pretty robust response like the ones that we're looking at. So if you can try to get in the habit of asking this clarifying question after you provide your response, it will work to cover some of your bases, because it can be fairly difficult to provide a fully detailed, well-structured response every single time, especially if you're faced with a question that you've never been asked before, okay? Questions about this before we move on to one final example? Okay. Example response 3. Over the summers, I work as a lifeguard at a pool. There are 3 other guards I work with, and we are all responsible for opening and closing the pool. We rotate responsibilities so that 2 guards handle opening tasks and the other 2 handle closing. There was one guard I was often paired with who did not pull their weight. I found that I was completing most, if not all, of the responsibilities by myself. They would often slip away to the bathroom or take a very long time to do one small task in order to get out of doing the rest of their work. When it came to closing, we were unable to go home unless all tasks were complete, so it often worked twice as fast to get everything done in order to go home. This probably hits home for some people in the session right now. I know it does for me. I always ended up staying late. I discussed this with the other guards who shared with me similar experiences. With only 4 guards, we really needed all hands on deck, so I decided to do something about it. Example response 3 continued. I was on closing duties with this particular guard the following day, and I decided to start by dividing up the tasks and hope that this guard would do more if they were assigned specific responsibilities. Unfortunately, that didn't work, and I left while I was busy with other things. A few days later, I was paired with this guard again for opening duties, and I tried the same approach. We divided up tasks, but yet again, they completed the easiest one and then headed to their guard station to start the day. After this happened a few more times, I brought it to the attention of my manager. The manager then discussed it with the teammate. So we have another situation here where someone's not pulling their weight. Unfortunately, it happens a lot. Even once you're out of a school environment, unfortunately, you're going to experience teams or projects where things are a little unevenly distributed or one person's kind of shirking their responsibilities, right? So here's another example of that, but with a very different approach. So let's break it down. This is our 3rd time doing this, so I expect that you're all in the groove now and you're pretty comfortable with it. What is the situation in this example? Remember who, what, when, where, why. Okay, playing duties as a lifeguard. The lifeguards are completing a series of tasks. Yeah, a lot of focus on the duties. They told me the size of their team. They told me it happens over the summers. They told me how it's organized, rotating responsibilities. The guards are completing opening and closing tasks, right? What was the task in this situation? It's fairly similar to the task we identified in our first example. Perfectly said, fair delegation of opening and closing duties. And it is briefly touched on in this example when the candidate says, with only 4 guards, we really needed all hands on deck. They needed everybody to contribute, just like that poor first student that was in that group project where someone wasn't pulling their weight. What was their action? What were the steps they took? Yep, dividing up the work with the other guard. This was a little bit of a different approach than we saw the first time around, that first example with the class project. This candidate, I think, got creative. I kind of like their approach. It's a little different than what we normally see. It doesn't exactly involve a lot of communication, but it is creative problem solving. And they're taking a little bit more of an organized approach to addressing negative situations, right? And they tried it a couple times. They said they did it when they were on closing duties, they did it again when they were on opening duties, and then they did it a few more times. So at the very least, they tried 3 different times, which is a solid effort, right? Before they took another step, which was bringing it to the manager. Do we know the outcome here? Yeah, no. Where's the results? We don't know. Did this work? All that effort? Did it work? We don't know. It's a little bit of a cliffhanger. So further down, STAR. In this situation, the candidate didn't fully discuss the result. And as an interviewer, looking and dissecting at this response kind of leaves you wondering, could it be because it wasn't a positive one? We have no idea. We don't know until they provide it, right? So let's say I'm interviewing this candidate, and as I do, I probed. I said, what was the outcome of the situation? Because I want to know, I don't want to be left hanging. And let's say, again, this hypothetical candidate explains that the manager addressed it with the teammate afterwards, and afterwards that teammate became very withdrawn. He did start to pull his weight, but he was not pleasant to work with. He didn't return to work at the pool the following summer. Not very happy ending, right? This example is unfortunately often true to life. Like I said before, we wish all of our approaches were effective and successful every time, but that's just not true. That just doesn't happen, right? You could, if you were a candidate with an experience similar to this, you could still use this situation as a learning experience. Again, from my perspective, the candidate did exhibit some good skills. It didn't yield the result that they were looking for, but they tried some things that they may try again in the future, and they may tweak or change. So I think it might be something that's still worth using, assuming the candidate can round it out by providing the results and framing it as a learning experience, right? So let's say this was the outcome, that the manager addressed it, the teammate became withdrawn, he didn't pull his weight, he didn't return. Not great, right? The candidate could turn this into a learning experience by saying something along the lines of, in looking back on the situation, I would have approached the teammate myself first. I'm afraid that going to the manager made the teammate feel like we were out to get them or dislike them. I think he maybe would have received it better had it come from a peer and a place of understanding. Though it wasn't a positive situation, I feel like I am better equipped to handle similar situations in the future. This speaks volumes. If you can pull information like this from your own learning experience, oh my gosh, you are going to grow so much from situations regardless of the outcomes, good or bad, right? It shows the interviewer that you have the right mindset around the situation by trying to learn from it rather than blame, which is an easy reaction to have, right? Or just walk away with nothing, which in that case, the situation wouldn't hold a lot of value, right? So this is a great way of using a variety of experiences from your past, regardless of the outcome, assuming that you've taken the time to reflect on them and, think of some solid takeaways from the situation that you can use moving forward. Again, if you're able to do something like this, reflect and provide me with, what the way this has improved you and made you a more skilled candidate, it will tell me that you probably are pretty equipped to handle something like this in the future. Like, I would trust that not only have you gained some of the creative problem solving skills from going through this situation, but you now have a little bit of a game plan about how you'd address it with the teammate, this, in a situation that arises in the future. Questions about this, because this is a little bit complex and it does take some serious reflection to be able to capture learning experiences and provide them in an interview. Any questions about this? Any questions about any of the examples that we broke down? Keeping in mind, your personal experiences are sure to differ. I think one of the best ways to workshop a method like this is to work through some examples, but ultimately one-on-one coaching will get you the furthest, right? And active effort on reflecting, capturing, and discussing your own specific examples, because you can only talk so much in theory. Really, the situation will depend on you, how you reacted to situations, the teammates that you were working with, and how things naturally unfolded true to life. What kind of questions do I ask people I interview? That is an excellent question. So I regularly use a behavioral interviewing technique, again, because I am recruiting largely entry-level candidates, so you don't have a whole lot of hard skills. We're more looking for soft skills and potential, which is so important and so valuable, especially if you're pursuing a position in which you'll receive a lot of training, like our management development program, right? So I ask a lot of behavioral interviewing questions that are tied to specific skills that are needed in a role like the one that we hire for example, leadership, communication, absolutely, organization, interpersonal skills. Those are some of the soft skills I really take the time to look for, and I have to use behavioral interviewing techniques to uncover those. Towards the end of our conversation today, I will offer a supplement in which I provide you with a lot of common behavioral interview questions and the typical soft skills they're tied to. For example, determination, organizational skills, time management skills, things like that. The variations of questions an interviewer may ask, so that if you're interviewing for a job you know requires time management and maybe leadership and maybe customer serve or communication skills, you can reflect on some of those examples to start to work through situations you've experienced in your life so that you're prepared to answer questions that will be looking for a demonstration of those skills. How cautious should you be when reflecting on past mistakes? Now, or candid, that's a great question. It's not always easily naturally done, which is why I urge candidates to practice as much as they can to the best of their ability, because the way that you present yourself and the actual verbiage you choose, like the wording, should be positive, right? You don't want to blame. You don't want to, sound defeated or deflated by the situation. Practice will help you work through the words that you use, the way that you present yourself. You can be candid, but in a professional way, like this candidate was. The phrase "in looking back on the situation" shows it. It's kind of like, hey, I'm about to open up about what I learned. In looking back on the situation, I would have chosen to approach the teammate myself first. I'm like, whoa, that's to me is fairly candid, right? You don't want to get into the nitty gritty, like don't waste your time in an interview talking too much about negative details, because that takes away from the time that you spend talking about all the wonderful things that you do and have done, right? So practice as much as you can, and we'll dive into that next. Practice as much as you can to help you work through the actual words you wish to use to present certain situations and to talk about yourself. again, some one-on-one coaching will help with that. If you have specific situations in mind that might be kind of tricky to talk about, and you and I can talk about that offline if you have specific questions or would like advice on a certain scenario that you're thinking of. So as I mentioned, a lot of reflection and a lot of practice is required to really get good at this and all interviewing in general. It never hurts to work on interviewing. I think even the most experienced candidates can use practice. So in an ideal world, the goal would be to have a reservoir of robust examples, complete answers, and takeaways from learning experiences to provide in response to a variety of behavioral interview questions, right? Don't we wish we all could just kind of pull that perfect example out of our back pocket? That takes time and practice. And I use the word reflection because it really does take even some pen to paper or talking it out through mock interviews with friends, peers, or family to help you figure out which examples from your past are valuable in an interview. This is something you can start doing today. You don't need to have an interview on the calendar to start exercising these skills. The more you talk about your experiences and work on addressing the S, the T, the A, and the R in your responses, the more naturally you'll be able to pull together, genuine, compelling, and complete interview responses. So start to work on this regardless of the stage you're at in your job search for internships or full-time jobs. Practice and reflection will help you minimize nerves, it increases your confidence, and it helps you adequately showcase your skills, which is what we're all here to do, right? The goal is to get the job. So you're doing all of this in an effort to not interview perfectly, but to really do yourself justice in talking about these experiences and really representing yourself for the great candidate that you are. That is the goal of the interview, right? So practice will help with that. Forgive me, I see a chat coming in. Someone added that they Googled all behavioral questions and typed out answers to common ones. That is a great idea. When I provide you with this resource or this supplement of common behavioral interview questions, particularly for entry-level candidates, you'll want to do something like that. Write them out or exercise them in a different format. Which brings me to how do I practice? One, mock interviews are fantastic. Check with your career services. I know it's something that is offered at Virginia Tech at various points during the semesters. If there aren't any upcoming mock interview workshops, maybe check local resources. Here in Philadelphia, for example, I know we have something called CareerLink, which is like a local free resource to use for job searching, and they offer a variety of professional development and career readiness, like workshops or sessions, including mock interviews. So check online for some resources, particularly in our current situation. Folks are more readily willing to offer services like this to help the folks that are in their job search. If none of that's available, practice aloud. Talk to yourself in a quiet space at home or in your car. This does work. It does help. I personally would talk to myself in the car all the time because there were no interruptions. I never felt embarrassed because it was me on the road and the only person I was embarrassed in front of was myself, right? So it gave me a safe space to practice aloud and to talk to myself. You might even consider recording and reviewing your responses. If you can stomach it, I know I personally don't love to watch myself on camera, but if you can do it, it's a great exercise to evaluate some of your answers, figure out how you'd want to tweak a certain part of your response, or if you think that, one example is you might as well throw it all together. That's one way to evaluate yourself and reflect. practicing aloud, whether that be at home, on a recording, in your car, or with, a trusted friend, will help you work through the verbiage you wish to use, like we talked about, right? Ensures your responses are succinct and ensures that regardless of the experience that you're talking about, good or bad, that you're framing it in the way that you wish or that you have in mind and want to share with the interviewer. This also ensures that your examples reflect the way you wish to present yourself. You might record responses and look back and say, oh my gosh, that's not me at all, right? Or you might, be practicing with a trusted friend or an advisor, and they say, oh, you have much more potential than that, or I don't think you're quite showcasing these skills, the way that you really have demonstrated. So practice makes sure that you are really reflecting the way you wish to present yourself. Practice also makes sure that you're positive, even when the examples are surrounding negative or difficult situations, like the ones we talked about today. It's not easy to talk about challenging situations, but those are the ones you're usually asked about in an interview. So work on it, right? And going off of that, avoid negative language and blame. It is easy to revert to negative language and blame. So practicing will work some of that out of your system. Any sort of negativity, regardless of the situation that you're discussing, will not leave the right impression. So try to have a positive, productive perspective on the experiences you've lived through, even if they weren't great at the time. See more chats coming in. Oh, Hannah is amazing. Interview Stream is a great virtual resource that Virginia Tech offers for interview practice. Check that out. Practice, practice, practice. Oh my gosh. Being in a university, particularly a school that's as awesome as Virginia Tech, you're going to have so many resources at your disposal. Start now, and you will be better equipped really for the rest of your career. So take advantage of them. Someone asked, what about when they don't have work experiences or have not dealt with challenge? How do you spin that? That is kind of the crux of being an entry-level candidate, right? Need experience to get the job, need a job to get experience. We've all heard that old ism. This can be difficult, but again, with the right amount of practice and reflection, everyone has lived through some sort of challenges. And it is okay if they're at the more micro level when you're an entry-level candidate. Obviously, you haven't dealt with a whole lot or very few people, when they're recent college graduates or early on in their career, have dealt with like life-altering challenges or organization or even department-changing challenges or disruptions, right? They're usually challenges that you face on small ways that start to build those skills and habits. So don't discount those small experiences you have. For example, I ask a lot about customer service in my interviews, and one example I received one time was about how a server remembered that this one gentleman came in, and every time he came in, he asked for a Diet Coke with 2 lemons. It sounds like the smallest thing in the world, but as she went into more detail and shared with me about how she remembered it and how it made the customer feel and how it made her feel being able to just, I know what they need, she was providing really good service, even if she wasn't tackling the most difficult or uncomfortable situation in the world. It is the small ways that you start to build habits, and that candidate did hesitate and was like, I don't know if that's a good example. She said that in the interview, and I said, no, tell me more. How did you interact with this person? How do you think that made them feel? Do you feel like, we talked more about the situation, and she provided me a couple other examples in which she did this, and I said, this person knows how to provide good customer service, even if it's the small things, because those make a difference. Oh, I recognize that we are well over time now. I'm going to provide a link so that you all can, if you're interested in the supplement I mentioned or you want to receive my contact information, You can receive it via email after our session today. The resource I'm referring to is the list of behavioral questions for you to practice with. So I'm going to pop that into the chat now. Bear with me. So you can easily leave your email and information privately. And I appreciate all of your active participation today. You have all been really fantastic. I know that we're a little bit over time at the moment. Here is the, oh, forgive me, I sent it to one person privately. Here's a link if you want to send your email and your name and you want to receive some additional information, or if you'd like some one-on-one coaching. I personally am super passionate about this, so if you need some advice on a particular situation that you're working for, or what you feel like will be a really challenging interview that you're preparing for, I'm happy to help. This is a skill that you're going to continue to develop now and honestly for the duration of your career. And it's something I really enjoy helping college students with, because I remember my first interviews were extremely nerve-wracking and I didn't do so great. So I want to kind of help share experiences whenever possible. If you need anything else from me, please reach out. My email I'll pop into the chat too, since I've exited my screen share. Otherwise, I so appreciate all of your wonderful and active participation today, and I hope you continue to stay safe and well out there. Thank you so much.